All right, so we are looking at day 8 here. So it's gonna be PowerPoint 7 of PFT 105. This is exercise physiology. So we are looking at training our aerobic and anaerobic energy systems. So today our conversation is going to switch a little bit. I always kind of I kind of like to refer to this day almost like it's almost like we're going to get philosophical in today's lesson, because we're going to talk about like what really separates a really good trainer from like someone who's just kind of phoning it in, right? Because I always said, like, you could absolutely put exercises on a dartboard, throw darts at it, let that choose your exercises. And as long as you do them in like kind of a circuit style or, something to really keep people's heart rate up, they're not going to get a bad workout. It's actually going to work pretty well. That's not really what we're going for, right? We want to be, we want to be the best trainer at the gym. We want to be high in demand, and we want to be the one that's, you know, really being specific for our clients. And so today's lesson's a little bit less about the physiology of stuff, and really more about like drawing the connection between like why we talked about all those physiologic adaptations, and then what that really translates to in terms of being like a specific trainer who picks their exercises according to what their client most needs. So it's almost, like I said, it's almost a philosophical lecture tonight, more so than it is like a scientific one. But that being said, there is actually going to be some pretty key vocabulary in here. We're going to learn a lot of principles tonight. Some of you guys who have already been through some of our other program design classes, you have seen some of these principles. We've talked about them before, but we're going to lay all of them out tonight. That way we don't have to tackle them when we get to our program design class at the end of this month. So our learning objectives tonight are to describe the principles of training in reference to overload, specificity, individual differences, and then also like reversibility. So, being able to like cycle your client through different types of intensities and things like that. Define the principles of reversibility and talk about like what that means for an inactive lifestyle. Like how do you basically modify certain exercises for your clients? If your client can't do, let's say you have a really obese client and they can't necessarily do like a full-on plank, right? Because that's a lot of load on their spine. There's a lot of like weight hanging down, pulling on the spine. Maybe that could cause like some problems. So how do you modify that slightly? Well, you change the angle from this to that, take a little bit of weight off. Now suddenly their spine's in a position that's a little more advantageous, and there's not quite as much force pulling down on it by simply modifying them elbows on a bench. So little things like that, those little modifications that you can make, really do make a really big difference. Really, that's what I think makes the difference between, some trainers are just like one-on-one trainers, and some people really work really well in like group exercise. And a lot of times I get questions from students because I know some people are thinking about going into boot camping or maybe group exercise instructors and things like that. And there's a lot of money to be made in group exercise. And they're like, well, do I need to get like a specific group exercise certification? Do I need to take classes on that? Those things can help. I think that like if you do take a class, you're going to learn some exercises that you might not get out of a normal textbook. They're going to teach you things about like timing, which is pretty handy. But I think like if you really want to be a group exercise instructor, one of the best skills you can start to develop is just keeping your exercise library up in your brain and knowing like what's one step up and one step down for an exercise. Like if they can't do full push-ups, take them to their knees. If they can't do it from the knees, let them do a curl up, right? Like a McKenzie push-up. And then if they're just on the border, they're like knee push-ups are too easy, but regular push-ups are too hard. Well, maybe you can do like negative push-ups instead. So they do the eccentric portion, like a full push-up, and then they do the concentric portion on their knees. So little like modifications like that, and being able to pull that instantly, and while you're teaching a class and you're yelling at folks, keeping them motivated, and you see some person in the back who's like struggling, and you run over there and be like, hey, quick modification, try this instead. And then somebody else is like, you know what? I'm having a really easy time on this. How do I make this harder? Right? Boom, boom, boom. So principle of reversibility is kind of a fun one to talk about. We will talk again about energy transfer in terms of athletics, just like we talked about last night, but I'll keep it brief because I know we've kind of already gone over it a lot. We'll talk about the training adaptations that take place in anaerobic training versus aerobic training. So we're going to look at the differences between how we develop type 1 or type 2 fibers, how fast twitch fibers play a role in things like sprinting, and then some of your nervous system changes, which are adaptations, as well as VO2 max changes. What factors influence like your anaerobic training, and then how we'll end it all with like talking a little bit about like how interval training is going to have some really positive effects on us as well. So let's go ahead and dive in. So as we're looking at it, in terms of like exercise, we think about like the idea of like working out. I like the term working out. I use it a lot, I'm a fan, but you know what term I like way, way more? Training. Maybe that's because I'm a nerd, and I grew up watching a lot of, cartoons and things like that where they would train for a big enemy or something. But I always like the term training a lot more because like it really kind of paints the picture of what it is. Gives you a purpose to go to the gym, and it's like you really don't feel like wasting any of those minutes that you're there because you got a reason to really put the effort in. So in order to prove athletic and performance, right, in order to like get more athletic, there are a few principles that we have to understand. Probably the most important one is this first one that we're going to talk about, which is the principle of overload. Sometimes you'll hear people refer to this as progressive overload. That's a really common term that gets like thrown around. But in order for your body to adapt, you basically have to make sure that your body has a reason to adapt, right? That's the principle of overload. Well, also, when your body adapts to something, it's going to adapt to whatever type of stress you put on it, right? So that's kind of going again back to where we look at what we call the principle of specificity. Form follows function. So you want to have like a certain form where you're going to need to perform a certain way in order for that to happen. And then looking a certain way will help you perform it. Like it's all connected. And so whether it's your cardiovascular system or your muscular system, when it comes to like training, we really want to make sure that our adaptations, the type of stress that we're putting on it are hard enough, but also like specific to our goals, like whatever it is our plan is trying to achieve. So talking about the principle of overload here, like I said, it's gonna get we're gonna get philosophical tonight. So the first one we're talking about is like the principle of overload, right? The principle of overload states that greater than normal stress is required in order for training adaptations to occur, right? So basically, you have to do something that your body is not good at, right? Like you got to do something that causes your body to go, man, like we got broken down. Like that was a lot of stress on the body, and we didn't really like succeed. We should really have we should adapt to this and get better at it, right? So once your muscles have like adapted, then like you're gonna need a new like heavier stress in order for that to, in order to see that improvement. And so your intensity may stay the same per week, or maybe it's gonna go up per week, right? Like it depends on like what it is you're trying to achieve. Like if your intensity stays the same, that shows that like your body is, working on adaptation. But like if your intensity is going up and up and up, that's where like your body's going, all right, well, I need to, respond to that stress. So, I've been filling you guys in a little bit about like what I've been doing in the gym or, my backyard lately, right? Which has been like some heavier, very powerlifting style, right? Like I'm working a little bit more on my type 2 fibers this month because it's really my least favorite type of lifting. I really don't like powerlifting personally. This is just a personal thing, just because it involves really long rest periods. And I find that kind of, I don't know, my brain's just moving too quickly and I get really bored really easily. I just have a hard time resting. And also, I mean, like, I think that there's a reason for that too. You can see, like, I'm a pretty skinny dude. I like a lot of cardio. And so, like, I think that there's probably a lot of like back of the brain, animal brain, or lizard brain that's like, instincts telling me like, we are not heavy lifters, we are runners. What are you doing? Which is where like my probably disinterest comes from, but since I know that about myself, and I still want to keep up on powerlifting. I want to know, I want to have a perspective on it for when I teach it or, train clients or whatever. I always revisit it at least once or probably usually twice a year. I usually do it once every maybe 6 months or so. And January is always a good time for that because, you're motivated. It's the new year, new you, all that nonsense. I try not to buy into that New Year's resolution stuff, but it's a good time to be motivated. So lately I've been doing these, last week I was doing 5 reps. This week I'm doing 3 reps. Next week I'm gonna do 5 for my first set, 3 for my second set, and then a bunch of like 1 rep maxes at the very end. So that's a lot of like very, very heavy lifting. And what's cool is like today, or no, yesterday, on pretty much all of my lifts, I was able to feel pretty good by come like my last set. And I was able to up it by, 5 pounds for some of my upper body movements and like 10 pounds for my lower body movements. Feels pretty good. And today I was able to do that for both of my lower body movements. I was able to go up by 10 again on each of those. That was just the regular barbell squat and the deadlift. My chest, not so much. That stayed the same today compared with my workout on Monday. My back stayed the same. But my shoulders were also able to go up by 5 pounds, which is probably why my chest wasn't actually able to. I got shoulders set up before chest. I might switch that for tomorrow or for Friday. But that's kind of what the routine sort of look like now. And like the reason I'm making sure is like, I have to ask myself at the end of that last set every time, if I'm really trying to gain strength here, right? That's my goal this month. I really have to make sure it's like, do I feel like I can amp this up this set? And I try to leave it alone for the first one. I usually try to like go up on my last one. That's where I really try to like leave it all on the table. Because if I can do that, my body's going to go, what happened? We had an agreement. Well, you wanted 160 pounds worth of strength and I gave it to you. What are you doing lifting 165? What do you think you're doing? And so then your body will go, all right, fine, and then they'll adapt. It'll get a little bit stronger, right? And then hopefully the same thing. So like on Friday, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna that new weight that I achieve, that's gonna be what I lift for set 1. It's gonna be what I lift for set 2 and set 3. And then set 4 and 5, that's where I'm gonna probably try to go up by 5 or maybe 10 pounds. And that's me trying to make sure that I'm applying the principle of overload, right? I'm trying to make sure that I'm working at intensities enough that my body has to adapt to it. Does that make sense, everybody? Now, I don't just have to do it that way. I don't like it. Overload doesn't have to always be weight. That's sort of our most common. A lot of people think that like the only way to make things harder is to make it heavier. My goal this month is heavy lifting, right? But next month, I'm going to do a big reset where, I'm going to try to give my body a little bit, this is the most intense type of working out. So I'm going to then do sort of a gentle type to give my body some time to kind of respond to that, which means I'm going to do much more higher repetition, lower intensity exercise. Now, if I want to make an exercise harder, when I'm doing something that's relatively low intensity, I don't just necessarily make it heavier. Because if I make it heavier, all I'm doing is raising the weight, right? And that's not really my goal here. So if my goal is really to like, make it harder, but not necessarily just make it heavier, what I can do is I can also make it more unstable. And increasing the amount of instability, making something less stable, is also a way to make things harder because now my body has to like work to balance while I'm doing some lift, right? So I might be doing like, a single leg shoulder press while I've got my foot on top of like a Bosu ball, right? So I'm up on doing something like this. Well, now I've got all this like core stuff going on while I'm trying to like stabilize. What's great about that is I've got a lot of micro muscles that really didn't get any attention this month, like all my little tiny micro muscles that are there to like stabilize, they're not really getting a lot of attention while I'm doing this big powerlifting stuff because really powerlifting is all about prime movers. It's all about like just your big main muscles. All those little micro muscles are really not doing as much because they're not really, designed to lift very heavy. So next month, maybe I put the emphasis on them, right? And so that's like where we start to see like cycling happen. And we're going to see this later, but we look at like, our principles, overload is like a really big one, right? We want to be progressive about that. But also we want to change things up. We want to make sure that things don't get stale for our body because your body does plateau to things, right? So all that to say, the concept of improvement, right? It's consistent with an increased stimulus, which produces either a structural or like a physiologic response, right? The way I always explain it to my clients is, if your body has no reason to adapt to something, it won't, right? This is where, this is where I've talked about this. I had a roommate who was working at a Starbucks. He didn't want to work at Starbucks. He was just working there to pay the bills. And you know, we wanted to like, he wanted to get into like editing work, and he's a really good editor. And he was like, yeah, I just don't have time to really go out and like search for stuff. And I'm like, you don't have time to search for stuff because you're working at Starbucks. He's like, well, I got to pay the bills. I'm like, yeah, that's true, but like, like you're comfortable working at Starbucks because you got a roof over your head and you got this and that. Might be helpful for you to get uncomfortable. Like you might be better like, why don't you try putting money, a money aside into your savings and see what it's like to live on less for a little while. That way you don't actually have to be on less. And if if things really do hit the fans, you won't be like out of nowhere. But like, why don't you treat it like that and see like what it's like to struggle on how much money you would make as an editor? Because that's what you want to do. And it was really helpful. It was a really helpful thing for him to do. And I'm not saying that was the one thing that kind of got him off his butt. It took that conversation happened, and then he still worked at Starbucks for quite some time. But like now he's that's what he does. He edits professionally. Sometimes when you're comfortable, you really don't have any reason to like try things. You don't really have any reason to like step outside of things, right? Your body's exactly the same way. If you don't work at an intensity that's hard enough, your body will not adapt. It doesn't have any reason to, right? So, go back. Okay, hit the wrong button. So our principle of overload, we see this sometimes, like I said, it's referred to as progressive overload a lot of times. And so progressive adaptations, right? Continued progress in terms of like structure and function, they're dependent on you as the trainer manipulating how we are going to apply effort and work, right? Like, we know that like, we know that like if you overdo it, you can't overload either. You can't like experience growth. Like, in fact, if you work all the time, if you only continue like lifting really, really, really heavy, and you never take any rest, you don't get enough rest, and you don't have good nutrition, you might experience the exact opposite of growth. You might experience atrophy, which is muscle shrinkage. Because like when you're in the gym, our job is to tear muscle down, right? We don't build muscle in the gym. We break muscle in the gym, and then we build it in the kitchen and in bed, right? That's where we build muscle. It's your body repairing things later. So if your breakdown exceeds your synthesis, right, the making of new muscle, you're gonna have a bad time. Your body's not gonna have time to like build things up. There's also neural changes, right? Your nervous system's going to get stronger. Now, that's a really good example of what happened to me this week, right? Like I said, I went up on all my lifts. You think that's because like I packed on a few pounds of muscle since Monday? No, right? But my nervous system is getting more used to lifting in this way, and so it's experiencing adaptations. My favorite way to, I used to get to do this in class. It was my favorite thing. I would be a con man for just a few minutes. It was my favorite thing to do in class. Has anybody in here ever bought one of those bracelets that you're supposed to wear, that jewelry stuff that has like, they're like, it has electrons in it, and it'll help with your balance? Anybody ever bought one of those? Anybody ever buy into those? I feel like everybody falls for that, like, at some point. Yeah, what's up, Charlie? Oh, the hand.
Yeah, I bought one.
Yeah, right. It's so easy. My parents got into like, they were like, we're thinking about selling them. It helped us so much. And I was like, so I always do this bit in class. I can't do it now, but I used to do this thing where I would go, all right, we're gonna do an experiment. I'd pull one random student up and I'd be like, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to put your hands out. This is how they get you to buy those things, right? They have you put your hands out like this, and then they push on your arm and you lose your balance, right? And they go, okay, so now hold this, and then you hold the bracelet, and then they push, and you're like, you're solid, you can't move. So I used to go, the reason for that is because actually aluminum is a really good conductor. And so now I'm going to have you hold on to this pair of scissors here. And I'd have a student do that, and they would have better balance by holding on to the pair of scissors. And I would be like, now, really quickly, just so everyone is aware, aluminum does not do anything. I was lying. I lied to everybody. I do this like big con in the middle of classes. I used to love doing it. But what I did prove was that once you expose your nervous system to something, you are very likely to adapt to it relatively quickly and get better at it the next time. And that's actually where that kind of comes from, right? That little bit of practice, just the first time, gave you just enough stimulus, and you're going to be much better at it the round two. This is where a lot of clients, guys, it's so funny. They'll improve like tenfold in the first like 2-3 weeks of working out. You know, they'll see these early adaptations where they're like all their weights skyrocket like crazy. They start feeling better, and they're moving. You know, after that initial like first week of like where they can barely move because you've wrecked them, you know, after that goes away, they see this like they feel great, and they're like, I feel so much stronger. I looked in the mirror this morning and I can see my abs a little bit. It's like, okay, your abs are not going to show up after 3 weeks, but I love the fact that like you're motivated and excited. And the strength thing, the strength going up, those are early adaptations, and that's very much your nervous system getting better at stuff. Have you gained a lot of muscle? Not necessarily, right? Not yet, at least. Muscle growth is very slow, very, very, very slow. But nervous system growth is actually pretty quick. It's a very speedy adaptation. And so significant control there, right? Significant improvements in your nervous system are one of our biggest adaptations, especially if you're going into like maximum strength lifting. So let's look at some of these physiologic responses, right? And all that comes down to going back to another one of our kind of key terms here, which we'll see in just a second. But let's look at some of these physiologic responses, right? Hypertrophy is one of them. Hypertrophy is our big fancy way of saying muscle growth, right? That's what it means. It means, actually, I can't remember what it means. Hyper means a lot of, and then trophy, I guess, means growth. So I think it means lots of growth. Let me look that up, actually. Trophy. Spelled etymology wrong. Don't pay attention to that. To turn? Oh, it comes from trophy, yeah. Which means nourishment. So you're beyond nourishment. I like that. I love that. I love knowing the etymology of words, even if I'm bad at it. That's cool, right? You super nourish your muscles, and your muscles go. So that's our hypertrophy, right? So, the body will experience growth when you give it, exposure to overload. And you also will have atrophy. Atrophy is the exact opposite. That if you are doing too much tissue breakdown, you're not giving your body enough time to build it back up. That's where you'll experience like atrophy, right? This is where you get people who are lifting 5 days a week. They're doing total body all the time. They do like chest 3 times a week, for like 30, 40 sets. You see those kind of workouts all the time where it's like they do the bench press, then they go over to the chest press machine, then they go over to the pec deck, then they do some incline chest press, then they do some dips, some push-ups, and they're just doing like a ton of, they hit every chest machine in the gym, right? And then do the same thing for like their back and their shoulders, and then they usually skip legs. And so like when that happens, right, and they do that every day, it's like those extra sets, I get it, like you're trying to see your growth, but like that's actually going to keep you from experiencing growth because you're really not giving your body time to build things up. So then it's like, well, what's the perfect amount, right? Like what's, how do I avoid doing too much work, but how do I make sure I'm doing enough work to experience growth? Well, there's some differences in opinions out there, but generally, as a good rule of thumb, 10 to 20 sets per body part per week is a really good place to start. And then in terms of how often, and does that mean you can do 20 sets for your chest on, one day? Let's say you're doing 4 sets of 8 repetitions, bench press, incline chest press, pec deck, chest, cable fly, right? There you go. There's 4 exercises. That would actually, we need one more. And then body weight dips, right? So 4, 8, 10, 4, 8, 10, good Lord. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20 sets, right? And you can just do that on Monday and that'd be your chest day. And then you can do the same thing for shoulders. You can do the same thing for back. That's sort of your classic, what we call bro split. We do 1 body part per day over the course of the week. And you might have some really good growth with that. You're hitting the 20 sets. The problem with doing 20 sets in one workout, though, is you start to run into this problem that I like to call junk volume. where yeah, you have a lot of volume, but like your form on those dips after 5 sets of like other stuff is not going to be very good. And so, and also you're going to be so exhausted, you're probably not lifting very heavy anymore. So now you're not getting that nervous system response tied to your muscular response. So instead, what would happen if we hit 10 sets on one day and 10 sets again later that week? You know, and that's the other part of it is like you hit really hard on one day, you wait 7 days to come back to it. That's a long time. You know, where you're not going to experience like muscular loss during that week, but it's time you could be taking advantage of. So what if we just split that volume in half? We did 10 sets on Monday and another 10 sets on Thursday, right? You might experience a little bit, you're able to lift a little heavier consistently, you have good form for all 10 sets. And then, you know, your other sets on the next day. And then you're renewing it. You're not waiting 7 days to come back to those muscles. Or maybe you do 3 to 4 sets. On, you know, one day, and then you do it again and you do it again. You do 3 days per week. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm doing, you know, I'm doing the same workout 3 days a week actually, because I'm not doing I'm doing all my body parts. I go, you know, shoulder, chest, back, legs, and double legs. So because I'm doing every body part, you know, I'm not spending a ton of time on each one, and I'm hitting them 3 days per week. So, you know, I'm able to experience overload, but I'm not at risk of overtraining. Does that make sense? Any questions on that before we move into the next one? And by the way, bro splits have their place. It's a good way to change things up. I just wouldn't do it all the time. You know, if you've been having a lot of success in 2 to 3 days, you know, hitting the same muscle group 2 or 3 times per week, you've been doing that for a couple months, and you want to do like a big shocker month, where you just really do like a big reset and you do a bro split where it's like chest, 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 chest. Next day, back, right? Next day, you get into the legs. You can do that. I think that you can totally do that. I think that there's totally room for that in this world. This is where, you know, splitting things up, changing things up, that sometimes people call this muscle confusion. I hate that term, but like, you know, this is where like that kind of comes into play. So, we are going to see, you know, hypertrophy and atrophy. Those are some adaptations. Atrophy is the one we want to avoid. We'll also see nervous system changes. One of our biggest nervous system changes that we're going to see is the development of more motor units. So motor units, one of our key vocabulary terms in your textbook. And what it is it's a single motor neuron, and then all of the fibers that it innervates. So, you know, when you look at a motor unit, it'll look something kind of like this. It's a single neuron, and it'll be, you know, this one neuron here will be attached to, we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You know, it'll be attached to this many fibers, and you'll have another neuron attached to a whole bunch of other fibers, right? So it's one neuron and all the individual muscle cells that it is getting to contract, right, to do that whole sliding filament action. You know, increasing the number of motor units that you can recruit is going to result in massive amounts of strength. In fact, that's one of our biggest adaptations to heavy lifting. This is where like you'll sometimes see, I mean, look at like, you know, let's look at like bodybuilders, right? Let's see, I'm just going to look up a generic bodybuilder here. Dudes are huge. These are big, big, big humans, you know? Oh my gosh, yeah, Ronnie Coleman. Good Lord, what a large individual, right? But now let's look up like an Olympic weightlifter. Where's you? I can't remember his name. Can't remember his last name. It's Chinese, so I can't pronounce it. Oh no, not you, Lou. Sorry, there it is, Lou Xiaojun. This is one of the strongest humans on this planet. This guy right here. He has the Olympic gold medal in Olympic weightlifting, which is its own individual sport. So Olympic weightlifting is actually a sport consisting entirely of 2 movements. The power clean, which is where you pull the barbell to your shoulders, And then I'm sorry, the clean and I should say the power clean and jerk. So you pull it to your shoulders and then you jerk it up overhead. And the other movement is the power snatch, which is pulling from the floor all the way up overhead in one swift movement. So you have the snatch and you have the clean and jerk. And then you're allowed to do whichever version of the jerk you want to do in the Olympics. You can do a split jerk if you want. That's where you'll see people like split their legs, one forward, one back. Or you can just do a push jerk, which is, just legs shoulder width. Anyway, this guy has the record. Let's see, what is his snatch? Let's see what is his snatch? He has a 204 clean and jerk and a 176 kilogram snatch. So kg to lbs, because everybody in here is American, myself included. 176. So that man can grab 388 pounds from the floor here, and he can pull it all the way over his head like that. 388 pounds. That is an insane amount of weight. So that is the most powerful human on planet Earth. And you look at him, he's not that big of a dude, right? Like, I mean, he's clearly muscular, but he's not huge, right? And that is really where we see this idea of like nervous system strength come into the equation here, right? He is absolutely strong, even without being very, very, very large. And that's because he has very well-developed motor units. His nervous system is incredibly, incredibly strong. He's got a nervous system that is recruiting lots of muscle fibers, and they're all in sync, and they're all firing super, super fast. And that's great because not only does that result in power, but you can also train your motor units, to learn how to recruit lots of muscle fibers in the area. And that can create stabilization. So you can see increased stabilization, right? Maybe due to like an increase in proprioception. Your body has better understanding of where it is in space. It has a better, understanding of its own strengths, limits, and positions. And then there's also cardiovascular changes, right? We look at like, by doing long endurance types cardio, you develop more mitochondria, you develop more hemoglobin, you develop more myoglobin. Doing short, super explosive cardio, that results again in more motor units, larger muscle fibers, and we see a huge difference. I mean, look here, sprinter, Olympic sprinter versus Olympic marathon, right? Those are two very, very different body types, right? Experiencing two very, very different types of physiologic adaptations, you can see a lot more type 2 muscle fibers here and a lot more type 1 muscle fibers here. That's a substantial difference between the two. Now, which one's better? That's a silly question, right? Like, it doesn't work that way. That's totally not what we're looking at. It is all about like, what are you willing to train for and what are you willing to, reach adaptation. And that is where we kind of move into our next principle, which is the principle of specificity, right? So this states that is a training principle that states the body will adapt specifically to the demands that you place upon it. You sit on the couch all day, guess what? You are going to be an Olympian couch sitter. My mom has been training for that role for years. She's great at it. It's very easy to adapt to stuff like that. You think about like how we see so many people with like rounded shoulders and like this forward head posture, right? We're training for it all day, being on a computer, right? Looking at a computer screen, getting on our phones, right? All of that. I mean, that's, your body doesn't know that like you're just trying to complete a simple task and post something on Instagram. Your body is shortening muscles to pull you into what it thinks is a specific, athletic position. And then it gets used to that. it gets used to that position. So it gets, better and better and better and better at it until eventually you're bad at the opposite. So your body will adapt specifically to the type of stress that you place upon it. We commonly refer to this as the SAID principle, by the way. I want you guys to know that acronym. It'll come up again in later classes. But it stands for specific adaptation to the imposed demands. That's why they call it the SAID principle, specific adaptation to imposed demands. And again, this is where your body, again, will adapt specifically to whatever type of stress you place on it. This is where we as trainers had to get, we had to really break things into categories here. Like, what are the main adaptations that people experience when they do athletic stuff? Well, generally people experience mechanical adaptations, neuromuscular adaptations, and metabolic adaptations. And so like an example of mechanical adaptations, right, is you getting specifically good at lifting one type of weight or getting specifically good at one type of movement. When you think about like an Olympic sprinter, their legs, that sprinting action, that's something they're incredibly good at. You think about like a basketball player, they're incredibly good at jumping, right? That's like a specific movement that they make. You look at like a baseball player, they're incredibly good at generating like twists through the center of the body, right? Or a golfer, boxers, they're incredibly good at like generating a lot of like force and rotation in the upper body. So those are like the movements associated. That's like a mechanical adaptation. Where you think about like a machine that moves a very specific way. You would, put a piston somewhere and it would move exactly like that. That's why that's considered a mechanical adaptation. Well, it's also the weights. Baseball players, they need to be able to like hit. They need to be able to like take a bat and swing it through like a long lever, right? That bat is not very close to their center, so it actually feels and weighs more than it really like should, right? The further away from like the pivot point something is, the heavier it's going to feel. So they have to be able to generate a lot of power through their core. And so like it makes sense to have a baseball player do extremely heavy wood chops and rotational movements. And then to do, maybe remove that weight and do very explosive. So now you're teaching them how to be, very, very heavy. And then we're going to get neuromuscular adaptations here in a second, where that's going to be like the speed, right? So mechanical adaptations are the weight and the movements. You want to develop maximum strength in like your legs? Well, then you should pick leg exercises. That should come as no surprise. And you should lift very, very heavy. You want to develop like maximal strength in your chest? Heavy chest exercises. So that's our mechanical specificity, which is part of that being specific, right? And this is where like I get people all the time who are like, yeah, I'm trying to improve my bench. And then I see them doing things like push-ups. And it's like, look, I love push-ups. They're great. But you want to get better at the bench press? Get on the bench press, right? And do variations that mirror that movement. Next one we got is neuromuscular specificity. This is part of, again, the overall SAID principle. And these are like going to be, this says exercise selection as well. This is a little bit different than just movements. Movements are chest for chest stuff, back for back stuff, legs for leg stuff. Exercise selection is, well, do I pick the cable machine? Do I pick a calisthenic? Do I pick a barbell? Do I pick a dumbbell? Do I put them on a stability ball? Right? That's answering questions like that. Now, this actually has been broken down for you guys. You just don't know yet. I mean, some of you do. You've been through our program design classes. But we have different exercises for different categories and different adaptations that we're trying to achieve. If I've got a new client who's focusing on stabilization, I'm going to choose something like a stability ball chest press, right? Because they're trying to develop stabilization. So I'm going to put them on a ball, and they're going to have to stabilize while they're doing their chest stuff, right? And that's great, because now I've developed stability. If I got a client who's working on strength, I want them stable so that they can lift really heavy. And so I'm going to put them on a bench, and they're going to use a barbell rather than dumbbells, right? Because a barbell is going to give them even more stability, and they can literally just push heavy, right? Simple as that. And then if I got a client who wants to develop power, I'm going to give them like a medicine ball, and I'm going to have them chuck it as hard as they can, right? So that's my exercise selection. So maybe they do a chest pass. All three of those chest exercises are great, but depending on what your client is trying to achieve, that's going to determine which exercise you give them, right? Should I do a barbell squat, a squat jump, or a single leg squat? Depends on what my adaptations are. Am I going for stability? Single leg squat. Am I going for strength? Barbell squat. Am I going for power? Squat jump, right? That's neuromuscular. That's the neuromuscular side of specificity, right? And then the other part of it is tempo, right? Again, if I'm going for stability, I pick something unstable, and guess what? I want to lift really slow, and I want to have pauses because I'm going for stability. If I want to develop like strength, I want to move in the medium, right? Strength is really good where you can kind of just like get a little rhythm in it, right? And if my goal is like power, shocker of the year, we want to be powerful, we want to be explosive, right? We want to be really, 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 really fast. So those are all things you need to consider. So we've got 4 things to consider just when picking one exercise for our client based on their goal. And we got 2 more coming. So metabolic specificity, our last one. This is going to be your repetitions. So really it's your energy demand. Think of it that way, right? It's your repetitions and your rest period. This one should come pretty naturally now that we've been spending so much time over the last week talking about like, energy demand and stuff. But again, you want to develop endurance, lots of reps, very little rest. You want to develop strength, very little reps, very little time under tension, lots of rest, right? You want to develop power, kind of similar to strength, actually. So those are very different, different things for different adaptations, right? So now let's put them all together, right? Let's say I got a client who's trying to develop, let's say I got a 1 mile runner, right? They're running the 1,600-mile race, track athlete, right? So that means they need a pretty good amount of endurance, right? Because they're definitely going to be in the aerobic system. We look at the energy demands of like a 1 mile race. It's a bare minimum around 4.5 to 6 minutes, depending, if they're a terrific, amazing runner, right? So what's the record? It's just over 4, right? Record 1 mile run. It's like 4:05, 4:12. What? 3:43. Did we break 4? Am I just crazy? Did I not know this? Yeah, 3:43. God, that's insane. Man, I can run like a 6-minute mile, pretty standard. And that it kills me. Like, that's me working really hard, and have been working on it for a while. Whew, man. So okay. But either way, like that's definitely our aerobic energy system, right? It's definitely greater than 2 minutes. We're outside of glycolysis. So, I definitely want this person to have endurance. So mechanical specificity wise, I'm going to pick light weights. My movements, I'm going to focus on a lot of leg stuff, right? Neuromuscularly wise, my exercise selection, I'm probably going to pick very unstable exercises because those are associated with endurance, right? So I'll pick something like single leg squat touchdowns or single leg Romanian deadlifts, Bulgarian split squats, step ups where I do a balance at the end rather than just stepping both feet stable. My tempo is going to be relatively slow when I'm lifting because, again, that's also associated with endurance. I don't want to move through those repetitions too quickly. Metabolic specificity, my repetitions are going to be really high, which is going to pair really well with my low weight that I picked earlier. And my rest period is going to be pretty limited. I'm going to keep my rest relatively low and try to keep this person churning over and over and over again. Now let's take a look at, a power lifter. Let's take a look at somebody trying to break the deadlift record set by, I guess Hathor's got it now, although he didn't do it in front of like a professional committee the way that Eddie did, but deadlift record. And I guess Hathor has it at 1,104 pounds. God, that is insane. Imagine being able to just grab 1,100 pounds, just lift it up off the ground. So 1,104 pounds, right? Training for something like that, well, guess, I mean, this should come as no surprise. The weight should be heavy, right? The movements should be things related to the deadlift. So a lot of like, glutes, hamstrings, hip work, right? Neuromuscularly, my exercise selection, I'm gonna pick very stable environments. It'd be very dangerous for me to be able to try to lift something so heavy in an unstable environment. Tempo is gonna try to be very explosive, but good luck moving 1,100 pounds quickly. But I try to train for that. So maybe sometimes I back off on the weight and we do very explosive days. Metabolically, my reps are going to be very low. I'm trying to get better at lifting something once, right? So I don't need to do very many repetitions. And my rest period is going to be super high to make sure that I've got 100% of my gas in the tank before every single set, always. And lastly, let's go ahead and take a look at like a bodybuilder or maybe like an athlete, right? Both those are actually pretty similar. Let's say it's a football player, right? Someone who's like maybe on the line who needs to be able to push really, 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 really hard and heavy. But at the same time, they got to play. Yeah, they get a little bit of rest, but then they got to play the next play, and then they get a little bit of rest, and they got to play the next play and next play. I've never been on a defensive line. I've never played football for a team. I was my mom was like, "Have you seen how big your arm? You are no, you are not playing football." You think I'm skinny now? You should have seen me as a high schooler. Gangly is the appropriate word. Uh, but like, you got to feel bad for defense. Offense, those guys, they get to go as hard as they can. They get to step off the line, reset, and maybe come back a play or two later. Defense is on the field, especially if you're playing somebody like the friggin' Steelers with their hurry up offense. Like, it's exhausting. So they need a little bit of endurance, but they also need to be pretty freaking heavy and explosive, right? So mechanically, I'm going to choose moderate to heavy weights. Movements are going to be really total body, right? Exercise selection, I'm definitely going to be in a stable environment, but there's going to be plenty of times where, like, as an athlete, you're pushing on another human being trying to get over on them. I'm also probably going to need to do some stability work. Tempo is going to be really explosive, pretty much always, as often as possible. Metabolically, my repetitions are going to be pretty low on some days, but then other training weeks, I'm probably going to need to develop some endurance. So probably right in the middle. My rest period is going to be relatively short, actually, even though we are trying to lift relatively heavy. So really kind of, you're hearing a lot of middle conversation, right? We're really in the middle. Not as heavy as a power lifter, not as light as an endurance runner, right? So you guys have heard me say these rules the last couple of days. I've been talking about this a lot. Starting to see where these all kind of come down to, right? It is all about like how we produce energy. So that is our principle of specificity. Those are the three parts that make up specificity. Now, here's the really, really lucky thing, and I'm not going to dive into this too deep tonight. But luckily, NASM has done all of this work for you. So you do not actually have to consider all of this every time, but knowing it is what sets you apart from some other NASM trainer who just passes their test and grabs their movements from a magazine. So NASM has done this work for you using what is called the OPT model. And this is where NASM has split individual training goals into basically 5 different phases of training, which correspond with 3 different levels. The levels here are all about that exercise selection. So again, maybe we have like a single leg deadlift, a regular barbell deadlift, and a kettlebell swing, right? All of those are posterior chain exercises for the glutes, hamstrings, and low back. One is focused on stabilization, one is focused on strength, and one is focused on power. And they build on each other. So your exercise selection has to do with what we call our levels of training, level 1, 2, and 3. Then your phases of training are individual client goals. Again, stabilization corresponds with stabilization, power corresponds with power. But the concept of strength is split into, do you need endurance, do you need size, or do you need maximal raw strength? And we got different rules for each of those. We got different rep ranges that are going to correspond with these, and you guys are going to need to memorize all of them, inside, outside, backwards, and forwards. Nicholas and Jesse here, you guys have been working on it for a while now. You've been through several program design classes. Charlie, you've been through one. And everybody else in the call, you guys are going to do your first program design class at the end of this mod. So it's a lot of it is a lot of memorization of numbers and things like that. But I always think that like if you remember your principles behind those numbers, it makes them a lot easier to remember. So here's all the numbers for just the stabilization side of things, right? 12 to 20 reps for stabilization clients, 1 to 3 sets, always using a 4-2-1 tempo, 50 to 70% of their 1 rep max, and we take 0 to 90 seconds of rest usually. And those are, and there are different ones, like I said, for different phases. And that's why you got 9 months. 9 months to memorize all that. And that's why we do the program. You might have noticed at the end of every mod, we always do program design at the end of every mod. It's going to be very circular. Nicholas, how you feeling so far? Jesse, you guys, how you doing on your numbers? Is this your guys' last mod, actually?
Maybe for program design?
Yeah. Did you do program design kids?
Yeah.
Dude, this is your last mod. Oh.
Yeah, no.
Sad. It's always sad, but exciting. All right. Let's move it forward. Let's go ahead and any questions about that, by the way, before we move on? All right. So next one, this one is actually kind of silly. This one's not even in your real book. But the principle of individual differences, in my opinion, if you are applying the principle of specificity properly, you really don't have to worry about this one. But this is a training principle that states training for a sport or an activity should obviously be based on a client's individual needs. So the idea here is that when you are writing a program, you do want to capitalize on someone's strengths and you want to try to overcome any of their weaknesses. So make sure that you are paying attention to their age, their gender, their level of health, how quickly they're progressing, and then any other previous athletic experience they have, right? So, that's the individual differences there. Your goal is to make sure that like LeBron is a crazy athletic human being, I know there's, the GOAT conversation is out there and stuff. We don't have to have that tonight. But like, whether you are a fan or not, athletically, he is in peak condition. And as he has gotten older, his play has changed, or he used to rely a lot on raw physical athleticism. And now you can see like, he's sort of transferred. He's getting older now. And so now he plays like a little bit differently. His play style has changed, right? And that's really good, that's a lot of him, but it's also a lot of really good coaching and training on their part, capitalizing on the fact that like, he's got his experience while trying to minimize any of that, changes that are happening as we get older. Is the body just kind of starts to break down just a little bit, right? I just read an article. He spends about $1.5 million every year, entirely on rehabilitation. That's all his prehab stuff, preventative medicine. Look at Tom Brady. Dude is 1 billion years old. Greatest quarterback of all time. Which I freaking hate saying because I hate him.
Because it's the truth. It's the truth. That's why you hate saying it.
That's why I hate it. Because he's incredible. I gotta be honest and admit, like Tom, there's no argument that he's the GOAT. But you look at him, he takes incredibly good care of himself. I was reading, he also does a lot of weird stuff, but here's the thing, he's the GOAT, so I have no room to argue with him. But like a lot of it, I'm like, you don't need to do that. But he avoids all the acidic foods entirely, which is so funny because acidic foods are, we often have a lot of them, too many of them, but like they are still a very good part of our diet. You won't eat tomatoes because they're too acidic. And it's like tomatoes are very good for you. But he's got a couple Super Bowl rings that I don't. So who am I to argue? But I was reading, Tom Brady he said he's never had coffee. He's never tried it. Um, it's just crazy. But again, that's, capitalize on what you got to capitalize on, right? So that's your individual differences principle. You're not going to find this one in your textbook, by the way. I got it up here in the notes, I think, just because I think I was putting all the principles up here. This one is not in your standard text, just so you guys are aware. Now, next one, we've got the principle of reversibility. When you are writing a program, it's always very important to make sure that, we understand that adaptations are reversible when you stop training. This is why, I don't know if anybody in here, I mean, Jesse, we were just talking about, you were dealing with the lung stuff was killing you the other night, right? You haven't really had a chance to do cardio, not to mention you got smacked with COVID, which is particularly a lung disease. But it was rough, right?
Yeah, it wasn't my favorite.
It's a nice way to put it. I appreciate that. It wasn't my favorite. That was a good politician answer. But it's funny. I mean, like a little bit of cardio training can go a really long way. Your body will adapt to it pretty quickly. So as much as like we lose things pretty quickly, we also can get them back really quickly. Luckily, cardio. And well, let's look at the unfortunate side first. We got good news, bad news. The bad news about cardio, you can lose some substantial cardio strength in about 2 weeks. It dies quick. And a lot of that is because of enzymes. You lose a lot of those like enzymes that help you produce energy on the go, and you lose your endurance pretty fast. Luckily, the adaptations of building them back up also only takes about 2 weeks, which is where, again, you'll also hear people say, I've been running every day for 2 weeks, and lately I've just been feeling great. Usually that 2-week marker is where they really start to feel it. And then inevitably, they start over pushing it right around the 2-week marker, and then they get hurt. Because yes, your lungs adapt very quickly. Your muscles and bones, those adapt much, much, much more slowly. So that's a classic one. You'll know what I mean. Probably your first client, actually. So understanding that your flexibility, your strength, your endurance, all those things can be reversed. And that's why we want to make sure that we are continually training year round without really ever becoming inactive. But even just being a little bit active, it really does go a long way, So aside from like neuromuscular skills, supporting your cardiorespiratory system with like cellular responses, keeping those enzymes alive, so that you develop that aerobic capacity, is going to be a big part of like, training effective athletes. And so we need to remember that, anything that can be gained can obviously be lost. What's that line for the 40-year-old virgin? If you don't use it, you lose it. In that movie, it wasn't true, but in our world, it very much is. Next one we got to look at, principle of progression here. This is going to say that, gradual increases in the workload will result in continued improvement in both cardiorespiratory and muscular fitness, right? So you want to make sure that you are continually reassessing your clients so that you can push them harder, right? Let's say, so for instance, one of the ways that we target specifically cardiorespiratory training, right? We use a formula called the Karvanen formula. I'm going to pull up a Karvanen calculator here and just throw my numbers in. So, we go 32, we go 58, we go 59, and calculate. So, my 65% of my heart rate, my target heart rate should be around 143. If I'm trying to be between 65 and 75, I'm going to try to aim for somewhere between like 143 and 156 beats per minute, right? But let's say I'm really killing it. I've been working out like crazy lately. And my cardio has been just really, really good. And my client does a reassessment and they find that my heart rate has dropped. My resting heart rate has gotten even lower, down to 55 beats per minute. It's not a big change, but now it's 141 to 155, Let's say I don't exercise for a little while and my heart rate goes, my resting heart rate climbs. Well, now it's 145 to 157. So little tiny changes, they're not much, but they make a big difference. And that's going to mean that my client is getting a specific workout. So progress them, right? If you get a new 1 rep max, well, then, you lifting that lighter weight is not going to have the same effect that it used to, right? So again, this comes right back to our principle of overload. Gradual increases, right? So when we talk about progression, it's either an increase in strength or endurance, or maybe stability, right? Those are really the big ones that we're looking at. So we want to make sure that we have continued overload. And there's an over level, right? There's an optimal level. We want to make sure we also like do some deloading, right? Because a lot of times people will focus on overload, and then they never take any time to kind of let the body adapt to those things. And so deload weeks are actually really effective. That's called super compensation. And it's where what's weird is like your client will be working out really, really, really hard. Then you give them a deload week, and all of a sudden their body goes poof, and it blows up, gains all this muscle because the body's finally like, it's just been trying to keep up lately. And then finally it was like, we got a break, blow it up, and we see muscular growth, we see strength growth, we see all these things go up. And then next week they come back to the gym stronger, bigger, faster, all the stuff that we're looking for. That's we call that super compensation, which is so super fun to say. All right, so those are all sort of our big principles. When you hear me grandstanding about what makes a good trainer, and I'm talking about like someone who's being specific and stuff, now you understand sort of where these are all coming from. But we're gonna go ahead and move forward. Does anyone have any questions on any of those principles before we move on? Anything at all? Those are the big ones. Like I said, those are key vocabulary terms. You might get a question on your test that says the blank principle states that, and then they'll have like a big sentence, or then you'll have to pick the right principle, or maybe you'll get a question, or it'll be reverse of that, where it says the principle of overload states blank, and then you'll get 4 definitions. So just get familiar with those. They do come up as test questions both in Sochi and in the real test. I remember one of them being online and being like, I'm surprised this was in here. That's the one thing I remember when I took my test. I focused on all the wrong stuff. Any questions on that? You good, guys? Cool. All right, let's take a look at some other just general training principles that we always want to remember. One of those things is that it is always very important for you as the trainer to warm your client up. I know I talked about it the other day being very important because it will result in, increased capacity. We know that warm bodies perform better than cold bodies. But it's also really important because, yeah, there's some physiologic adaptation there, but there's also psychological adaptation. This is something I'm going to spend more time talking about next month when we look at our exercise psychology class. But like, I think the king of warming up is Michael Phelps. He is my favorite person to watch warm up. Let's see here. I used to love watching Michael Phelps warm up. He'd do the same thing every time. He had it down to like this very, that's not what I wanted. That's literally just the swim part. Is he gonna do it here? This is him actually running the race, so I guess it would be in here. Oh my God, double ads. I'm so close to buying YouTube Red. He would always do like, you see him do the shakes, he'd be standing there, and he would always have like the same posture. And I don't think you can see it, but he would also like, when he was allowed to, like, they'd have him like, he'd be in there like warming up before like, going to the actual line, maybe doing a couple like warm up laps and stuff. He'd have the same playlist. He would do these stretches right here every single time. You can see he's doing this weird toe tap thing. I love it. He had a whole freaking routine every single time. And he talks about it. They would ask him about it. They were like, you're so specific about your warm-up. What's going on with that? And, it was something that his coach helped him with. And he was like, before I even get into the water, I've already succeeded. I've already done something that I've won at because I did my warm up perfectly, which is kind of OCD if you ask me, but it's, oh God, it makes him so incredible as an athlete, right? So there is a psychological aspect to warming up as well. It is very good to do your warm up because it can get you, you know, ready for exercise. It triggers a couple physiologic events and it triggers a couple psychological events. Now, there are different types of warm ups. We have a general warm up and we have specific warm ups. General, and this is where, like, you know, you always hear me say specific is better. This is where general is good, specific is good. Both are great, right? And so a general warm up is like any warm up routine that's not specific to the exercise you're about to perform. So, you know, let's say it's really cold on your way to the gym, and so your body is cold. Let's say you're working out in the morning, you know, you just woke up. You need to kind of, you know, get the dust out of your eyes and stuff. You head to the gym and you do 5 minutes on the treadmill just to get your blood pumping. That's part of your general warm up. That's a good idea. Like, you're increasing your tissue temperature, you're getting things warmed up. Maybe you have your headphones in, you're listening to a song that's getting you pumped up. You know, that's a really good example of just a general warm up. And then let's say, like, you know, you've got some tight muscles, like me, really tight hamstrings, relatively tight calves, right? So for me, I always follow up like a little bit of like the body temperature stuff, with just like a little bit of like warm up for all my problem muscles, my real troublemakers. Non-specific stretches, even if I'm not doing, let's say I'm doing a heavy bench day, you know, I'll still do a calf stretch or a hamstring stretch here or there. And then, you know, maybe it's like a little calisthenics, maybe do some body weight squats, maybe do some jumping jacks, high knees, butt kickers, you know, all those things that are just generally good idea. And then there are specific warm-ups, which are exercise routines that actually relate to the activity that you're performing. So, you know, warm-up sets are a really good example of that. Or like maybe like warm-up runs where it's like, okay, here's, you know, 20-yard cone. You know, I want you to jog it 25%, 50%, 75%. All right, give me a 90%er and then head back to the line. You know, and if that's just like a good way to kind of, you're sort of amping things up really, really slowly, getting ready for your runs, or maybe just a warm-up set, right? You can actually find, by the way, if you guys are interested, and I find that they are really helpful. There are warm-up calculators out there that will do all the math for you when it comes to warming up. So you can, there's an app called Warm-Up Lifts. There's no way you can see that, whatever. Anyway, it's called Warm-Up Lifts. Let's say you're doing a 300-pound, you know, deadlift for the day. Well, go in there and put 100 pounds on the bar, do a set, you know, for about 8 repetitions. Oh, and that's an 8 rep day. Hold on. Let's say you're doing 300 pounds for like a 3 rep day, right? So go in there with 102 pounds, lift it for 3 reps, rest about 30 to 60 seconds, do it again for 3 reps, move it up to 150 pounds, move it up to 200 pounds, 249 pounds, and then you're on to your first working set. Take about 60 seconds of rest every time. It's a great app. There's a lot of them out there and they really help. And it is free. Yeah. So I will say one thing. I just want to be honest with you and very clear. I never want to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. I often skip that double one in the beginning. This has it, you know, they have 5 warm-up sets. I usually do 4. So I do 1 really light one instead of 2 really light ones. That's not me telling you to do it. That's just, you know, I'm lazy. So those are really, really great. Those are your warm-up sets. Calisthenics that are specific, you know, similar to the movement that you're doing, that's a really good example. A lot of times when I'm trying to do like a pull-up day, I will often do like some scapular pull-ups first, where I just do just this movement here, which is not a lot, but like that little bit just warms up my shoulder blades and really helps me once I get on the bar. And then cool downs. This is, you know, also very important. I would say this is the #1 skipped thing. In fact, you know, I got a room full of people who work out here. Raise your hand or use the raise hand feature if you have skipped your warm up in the last 7 days. Or I'm sorry, skip your cool down. Yeah, it's easy to do. It's so easy to do. But it is so important. It really is. Your cool down, there's a couple of reasons it's important. Obviously, it's a chance for you to kind of get your mobility and do a little bit of that flexibility training. that's going to kind of reset you. Um, you know, that it's going to kind of reset you, at the end of your workout. Stretch muscles that you maybe worked on that day. That way they don't ever develop into overactiveness. But then also, guys, this one right here, it sounds silly, but it is actually important. It also provides an emotional rebalancing at the end of your workout, which, like, I'm not saying like you're walking out of the gym crying, and this is going to prevent that. But like that little bit of like just emotional reset means that your body's going to make less stress hormones, particularly cortisol, which we know is a fat building, muscle breaking hormone. Something we are trying to have as little of in our body as possible. So I'm a big fan of cooling down. Oh, I'm sorry, Charlie, did you have a question?
Yeah, coming down to that, to cool down, it's also good to do I think I heard in a previous class, static stretches, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And so generally in when it comes to stretching, going back to our types of specificity we talked about earlier, we do have different stretching techniques that I'm going to teach you guys in later classes. But yeah, like when we have like static stretches, those are really good at turning our muscles off. So we wouldn't want to do those on heavy lifting days, right?
Right.
So we would do active or dynamic stretches instead. The exception to that rule is on the cool down, right? The cool down workout's over. Static stretch away. We don't care if we turn the muscles off. I'm not doing any more heavy lifting, right? And also static stretches are the ones that have been shown, to decrease the activity of those muscle fibers, which is exactly what we want when we're trying to like say, hey, body, muscles, it's over. We killed the bear. We survived. Everything is good. Don't make any more stress hormones. In fact, make happy hormones. So like that stretching can be really great, and then also, and again, I've told you guys this before, your clients will never believe you, but a little bit of cardio at the end of your workout, just 5-10 minutes, just go get in the aerobic zone, 60% of your max heart rate, nothing crazy, just to kind of pump the blood around at the end there. That's going to make sure that there's no lactic acid necessarily pooling in any one area, and that can have a really positive effect on your muscle soreness. A lot of people think that stretching after a workout will keep you from being sore. There is not one piece of hard scientific literature out there that suggests that stretching keeps you from being sore the next day. Crazy, right? Because we all believed it. I believed that for years. Even knowing that now, I'm like, my brain, I'm still kind of like, I don't know, it makes me feel so much better the next day. I still, but there's not one piece of hard evidence that proves that stretching has any connection to how sore you are. It does provide temporary relief, because when your muscles are so sore, their muscles are contracting like crazy. So I gotta fix my light. I got dumb light bulbs. So it does stretch them out, which sort of turns them off. And if they're tightened up because of like trauma and your brain is just causing them to stay tense, you can get temporary relief, but that doesn't actually reduce like the overall soreness. You want to reduce the overall soreness? Go do a little bit of cardio after your workouts. Burn all that lactic acid off as a fuel source, so that it doesn't have a chance to just sit on your muscles and drive you into more soreness. All right. So moving away from warming up and cooling down, just really quickly talking about energy transfer here. We do know that like we as athletes, if we're training someone, we want to train them to be able to meet the energy demands of whatever their sport or activity is, right? Neuromuscularly, cardiovascularly, but very much metabolically. And so, these are all going to rely on that constant supply of ATP. And we have all of our different ways to produce ATP. Just as a quick review here again, we have creatine, phosphate, and adenylate kinase reactions, which are both that ATP-PC system, right? So your ATP-PC system can regenerate ATP by basically reattaching broken phosphates, right? And so it uses a little bit of that creatine kinase enzyme to basically donate that phosphate back. So you have ATP, you break it off, you're left with ADP, and then we reattach that phosphate. But guess what? It's ATP again. So we just break it over and over and over again. So that's our ATP-PC system, or the phosphagen system. Then we have anaerobic glycolysis, right? Where we bring in a molecule of glucose and our body spits out 2 ATP and a whole bunch of pyruvate. Then that pyruvate ferments and it can go into our next energy system, which is our aerobic energy system. First part of that is going to be the Krebs cycle, where it's going to take that pyruvate from glycolysis, add a little bit of oxygen, and turn some of it into ATP. So you end up with a little bit of ATP at the end. So lactic acid plus oxygen go in, ATP comes out. And then our byproduct is a little bit of CO2. So we exhale a little bit of CO2. And we have a whole bunch of NAD and FAD. And the NAD and FAD is the ingredients in our next final part of the oxidative metabolism. So now NAD and FAD go into the electron transport chain along with some more oxygen, and a whole bunch of ATP comes out. And our byproducts are a little bit of water that's left over and a whole bunch of CO2. So we exhale that CO2. So those are our sort of, we're looking at transferring between systems, which means we need to have a pretty good buildup of glycolysis to happen before we can effectively fuel the Krebs cycle, which will effectively fuel the electron transport chain. So if you are having trouble in one of these systems because you haven't really trained for it, that starts to make a lot of sense. That starts to make sense as to why we see some people have more endurance than others, and we see other people who have more strength than others, right? If you've been training for glycolysis consistently, you're going to be very good at the types of exercise that rely on this metabolism. And if you have a lot of endurance, you're going to be very good at the types of exercise that rely on this part of metabolism. But you got to make sure you get through this one first. So, and we felt that, right? You'll feel yourself moving from glycolysis into your other energy systems. It's that moment right during the beginning of your run where you really do kind of want to stop, where you're just like, you start jogging and you're like, starting to get the goo in my mouth, right? Get that first spit. Everybody else has that, but I always get like my first like loogie and then I'm good. Sorry. And then, after that, that's like right around where I'm like, all right, now I'm in the Krebs. Now I'm good, right? So there's plenty of oxygen going in. My core temperature is warm. It's easy for me to transmit the oxygen that I need to. And, there's plenty of lactic acid that's being built up, but I'm not making too much of it, So that's always kind of fun. By the way, again, we've talked a little bit about the keto diet. Keto diet, like I said, does not have any glucose in the diet, so it skips glycolysis. I've done keto for fun. I did it as like a science experiment for 2 months, and I was extremely stringent. I know some people, when they're on a diet, they would, this was not a diet, this was a science experiment. So like no glucose at all for like 60 days. I was really strict about it. And I didn't hate it. I didn't find that it was better, but I'm already kind of an aerobic athlete, so that's not really surprising. But I will say, whenever I would go for a run, that first 60 seconds to 2 minutes, I wanted to quit every time, because like I was very much in that glycolysis area. I just didn't have any glycolysis fuel. But once I was able to get to like where there was enough acetyl-CoA to get into the aerobic side of things, and sort of bypass that through that beta oxidation that I was talking about last night, then I felt great and I had plenty of sustained energy. But man, did I hate that first 2 minutes, which is unique for me, because as rough as the 2 minutes are for a lot of people when you're transferring, I've never really hated it that much. But during keto, I was not a fan. And my high rep workouts were great, and my low rep workouts were not. That was my experience. Then again, I didn't do super low lifts. I should have been doing like powerlifting that month, but we already talked about how I don't like powerlifting. I just don't enjoy it. All right. So let's go ahead and look at, cardio adaptations here. A lot of this, we've been talking a lot about, anaerobic or different types of adaptations. Let's look at cardio first, and then we'll look at strength training after that. So cardio adaptations, right? Anaerobic adaptations are best developed if you use like intervals, right? So going back, earlier I showed you the Carvenin, right? You showed what my heart rate needs to be under certain circumstances. Interval training usually involves like 86 to 95% of your heart rate max, followed by periods of like 65 to 75% for recovery. And so you work really, really hard, and then you recover. And you work really, really hard, and you recover. That's like our HIIT training. There's also medium interval training. Maybe you don't go all the way up to 85%. Maybe you're just somewhere between 75 and 85. 85 would be your top, rather than going all the way up to 95. That's not bad either. Both of those can have really positive adaptations. But if you're looking for anaerobic adaptations, you're much better off working super, super hard and sprinting followed by a recovery. So anaerobic adaptations are best utilized with your classic like interval training, right? Running, swimming, these are usually our most common versions of this. Spin bikes are another really big one. But when it comes to like cardio training, if you are a very anaerobic athlete, so my bodybuilders that are out there on the call right now, my power lifters, if you are like an anaerobic athlete, I do recommend focusing. If you are going to do cardio, I recommend doing HIIT training. I love marathoning personally, but it's not going to serve you very well. Marathoning is not the type of cardio that really gives you the energy that you need for bodybuilding, but anaerobic adaptations do. So get yourself up to that super high heart rate and then recover. I really like a 1-to-3 ratio. One of my all-time favorites is just doing a whole bunch of rounds of 30-second sprint as hard as you can go, followed by a 90-second recovery. So that's a 2-minute round. Do 10 reps of that. That's 20 minutes of cardio. That has been my bodybuilder formula for years. Warm up for 5, and then 10 rounds, 30 seconds on, 90 seconds off, 5-minute cooldown. And it works really well. It's a great way to get a decent enough calorie burn. It only takes 30 minutes of your time. You're not really going to sacrifice too many calories to cardio, but you are going to train your body anaerobically, which will support you further in the type of lifting that is best suited for bodybuilding. Yeah, what's up?
Question. So when you're doing sprints, you're talking about like the type of sprints we did on earlier this week, like kind of like going to a spot and touching.
Yep, working really, really hard. I would do more active recovery rather than what I had you guys do. And I would shorten that. I would make you move even faster and have you go for 30-second rounds rather than 60-second rounds. And then I would have you walking or maybe jogging during the in between rather than where we were doing full rest.
Okay.
My favorite actually is hills. I think you'd be served really well by doing hills. Go to a trail, get on a treadmill, and 30 seconds uphill, real hard, rest for 90. But don't just like rest. Your heart rate shouldn't come below 65%. If you're recovering and your heart rate's dropping to like 50%, good for you. That shows that you're in good shape because you're recovering very quickly. But now you're wasting valuable time, that could be spent working harder. So don't go too easy. That's another mistake a lot of people make when it comes to HIIT training. Now aerobic adaptations, that's totally different, right? Cardio for aerobic athletes, they primarily, we're relying on like oxygen, adaptation. So we're looking more at like cardio adaptations, pulmonary adaptations, and also metabolic. So we're really looking at, the ability to have endurance, right? So now this is where we're looking more, instead of doing like, what I had before, which was like a 1-to-3 ratio, right? 30 seconds to 90 seconds of rest. Or by the way, 1-to-2 ratios work really well too. 30 seconds on, 60 seconds off. That's another really good one. So 1 to 1 or 1 to 3, 1 to 2, 1 to 4 if you're not in the best cardio shape. Those are really good for anaerobic adaptations. But if you're going for like aerobic adaptations, you can still do interval training, but you're probably going to focus more on a 1-to-1 ratio. So maybe 60 seconds on and 60 seconds off, or 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. They're equal, you know, which means that like it's going to look very different. So I know how much you guys love my paint drawings. But if we look at like anaerobic adaptations, right? Those, like I said, are best achieved at like a 1 to 2. Actually, no, we'll do this. These are best achieved at like a 1 to 2, 1 to 3, or 1 to 4 ratio, right? Versus like aerobic adaptations, which would be much better at like a 1-to-1 ratio. Right? Or even like 1 to 1/2 actually. I like that one better. That would even be, oh crap, that would be even better. Sorry, that's just gonna drive me crazy. All right. Oh, why did you? Okay. So I want to show you what that looks like. You know, if we're trying to visualize this, what your intervals actually would look like. You know, the black line is going to represent an anaerobic. The black line is going to represent an anaerobic adaptation, and our blue line will represent aerobic adaptations. So it'll look something kind of like this. If you look at like your intensity, if we put intensity on this line here, right, and this is like the duration of your workout, right? You know, we'll notice that like, let's see here. Well, those anaerobic adaptations will look kind of like this. Your intensity will go really, really high, and then it'll come down, and then you'll end up recovering for quite some time. And then your intensity goes really high again, and then comes back down, and then we recover pretty substantially, and then really high again, right? So that's kind of what anaerobic adaptations look like versus like aerobic adaptations, which are going to look very, very different. Aerobic adaptations, you know, that's where we're looking at like, we don't really go quite so high, and we don't really ever come quite so low either. And so we have much smaller waves here because they're kind of equal to one another, right? That's what your intervals kind of look like when you're setting them up. So very, very different styles here, right? The black line would be really good for bodybuilders and power athletes. And the blue line would be really good for like endurance athletes, maybe like soccer players or just runners or swimmers or whatever, triathletes. Yeah, so there's a lot of our aerobic adaptations that we see, right? It will develop a decreased resting heart rate. Your resting heart will actually go down because your heart gets so much stronger, you know? Because your heart gets so much stronger, you're able to pump more blood with less beats per minute. You know, it's squeezing real hard. You know, you got a good grip. That's awesome, right? And so like those are some of the adaptations we see. We see that like you have more oxidative enzymes, so you have to breathe less, you know, often and bring in less oxygen. And we see even like your diaphragm actually strengthens. And so your pulmonary system gets better at drawing a greater amount of gas in. Your blood cells develop more hemoglobin. And so then we start to see that, like, they can carry more oxygen as well. All right, let's go ahead and look at lifting, right? What about like weightlifting? What kind of adaptations can we expect there? Well, this is where, and oh God, this is, I think, backwards in our notes here. I got my notes, I got aerobic down here and I got anaerobic up here. So lifting weights does have some, positive aerobic adaptations actually. So pulmonary adaptations include, like, again, increased ventilation. You get a stronger, you develop, like, planks, it will make your diaphragm stronger because your diaphragm actually does assist in stabilizing your core actually. A lot of people don't ever think of their diaphragm when they think of their core. I think they're six pack, but doing core exercises makes you better at breathing. And that's going to mean that you can draw a greater amount of gas into those big empty sacs that we call our lungs, right? We see key enzymes, right? Like I said, that will promote aerobic power and, utilizing fat and oxygen. But because of that, those aerobic adaptations, a lot of times are going to develop very much type 1 muscle fibers, right? Those are going to be really good at developing our endurance fibers. So yeah, you will be able to deliver lots of oxygen, but lactic acid really never has a chance to kind of sit around. So it really doesn't create that much cellular damage. And because there's not as much cellular damage to the muscle fibers, there's not as big of an inflammatory response, which means there's not going to be as big as of an immune response. So the body doesn't really grow in response to that. And so type 1 muscle fibers are really good for that long duration exercise, but if you're trying to bulk up that way, it's not really the most effective way. Now, I do want to be really clear here. That does not mean that, like, if your goal is to gain muscle, you should totally avoid ever doing aerobic exercise. It's still, your body's going to grow if it needs more muscle, A lot of people will use this as a way to be like, well, I don't want to do the stabilization phase because it's high reps and it's low intensity, but, like, trust me, you will be plenty sore after a stabilization workout and it will build plenty of lactic acid. But yeah, if you want to make sure you're being on more on the bodybuilder side of things, keep it to 12 to 15 reps. Keep it closer to 12. And if you want more aerobic, then closer to 15 to 20. There's a large range there for you to play around with. There's a stabilization routine for everyone. Doesn't matter what type you are. Then we also have our anaerobic adaptations, which are usually the ones we actually think of. Training for adaptations of strength or power, right? So we've got those type 2A fibers and type 2B or 2X fibers. 2X are they're definitely going to benefit from super heavy lifting and from explosive movements. So like I said, this month I'm doing like a lot of like heavy lifting. I'm keeping the reps anywhere from 1 to 5. I'm doing 3 this week. I'm doing 1 next week. That's very much a 2X style of training, even if it isn't plyometrics. But I'm putting a lot of conscious effort into making sure I'm trying to lift explosively when I am lifting every single rep. Next month, I'm actually going to keep this exact same workout, except that all I'm going to do is I'm going to superset all of the movements with a very light power exercise afterwards. So my military press will be super, super heavy. Then I'll rack it, grab a light pair of dumbbells, and do really explosive, extra fast shoulder presses. Then I will do a super heavy barbell squat, followed by box jumps, which I'm really excited to buy some boxes next month. Add to the collection. Heavy deadlift, followed by some kettlebell swings. Bench press, followed by clap push-ups. Bent over row, followed by, unfortunately, rack pulls, which are not a perfect translation. I'm thinking about buying a slam ball, which would be much better, like a medicine ball that I can really beat up. But it's like all concrete back there, and I'm worried about the texture. There's my whole life story. Anyway, so that's really trying to train 2X, right? I'm all about like being as explosive as possible. And then, maybe I raise the reps up a little bit and continue with the heavy lifting. I don't really know what I'm going to do after that. But if I do, that'd be a way to get more of the type 2A in. So maybe instead of like all the way down to 5 or less reps, maybe it's somewhere between 5 and 8. That's a great way to get those type 2A fibers going, you know? And I do less rest periods. So your anaerobic training, you got to be able to deal with the discomfort of anaerobic training. Anaerobic training tends to be the most uncomfortable because it is all about building up a ton of lactic acid. You know, so this is just building a ton of that burn and just dealing with it, you know? And that's a good thing. It's rough, but it's real good for you. So we do love that long duration. Really, it's just like everything in the middle there with that 2A stuff, you know? And sometimes like dealing with that like fatigue, sometimes it's hard to deal with a lot of new clients, which is why a lot of people want to get into bodybuilding right away. And like man, is it rare that I will take someone into an actual bodybuilding routine within their first like 3 months. I usually try to avoid it until I have a really good working relationship with that person, because I'm gonna get a lot of back talk once we get to that burn. And so you know, that's something to also consider when you're training your clients. You know, don't forget they're gonna be uncomfortable. They're gonna be crying. I'm one of them. I'm actually really whiny a lot of times. I never stop working, but I like to verbalize my pain. Now, last little thing, and this is going to be very, very short. So I'm going to move through this pretty quickly because we're going to see much better versions of this in later classes. But there is one other way that you can choose all of the factors that make a really good workout. They are called the FIT principles. You guys will see these over and over and over. NASM loves to make you guys memorize the FIT principles. But these are training factors that usually are aerobic, but they can be applied to anything. And they are things like frequency, how often you are training, your intensity, which is the level of effort, the time, which is both the length of time of your workout and the length of time spent on a program. So 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever. The type, which is like, you know, are you doing biking? Are you doing swimming? Are you lifting weights? And then the enjoyment factor, which is the E at the end there. Every trainer uses FIT principles, every certification out there, but NASM likes to have this E in there, which is the enjoyment factor. That is something to consider with your clients, because I always tell people this: you could create the best, most physiologically sound workout in the world. If you can't get someone to do it, it is not worth a sack of beans. So make sure that like there is some enjoyment factor in there, you know? So intensity, duration, frequency, all of those things are important. And then at the very end of the PowerPoint here, that's the end of the notes. But at the end of the PowerPoint, you can see here are some really good suggested work to rest ratios, like I told you guys about. You know, for interval training, usually you want to work somewhere between 1 to 3, 1 to 2, 1 to 1, or even 1.5. If you're going for like your immediate energy system, a 1 to 3 work to rest ratio works really well. So even if it's just, you know, 20 seconds of work followed by 60 seconds of rest, that's pretty good. That's really good if you're trying to like be a heavy powerlifter. If you're going for more of like a type 2A athlete, so like, you know, very much like most sports, 1 to 2 works really well. 30 seconds on, 60 seconds off. And if you're trying to go for like long distance running, 1 to 1, 1 to 1.5. If you can handle 1 to 1/2, that's also really good. Although that's not up here. Always consider, genetic conditions. We already talked about that. Strength, muscle size. Look at your body and look at your clients' like fiber composition. You know, pay attention. I do not put a ton of stock into the whole ectomorph, endomorph, mesomorph thing. I don't put a ton of stock into that because I think a lot of times people use that conversation as an out you know, like as a way of like excusing not training for something. So sometimes I don't really like bringing that up too often, but yeah, obviously genetics are going to play a factor. You know, everybody in my family is long and skinny. It plays a role. But again, the body is incredibly adaptable. It will adapt to certain things. Aging, be aware that the aging process is going to result in less muscle mass. Generally, as we get older, we tend to switch from having type 2 muscle fibers to more of a type 1 situation. Our muscles get a little stiffer as we get older. Blood vessels get a little bit thinner and a little bit stiffer. So blood pressure changes happen. Body fat tends to increase. So just be aware of those things as we get older, and adjust for it for your clients. Make sure that you're not, going easy on your senior clients, but make sure that you are. That's the thing. People ask all the time, it's like, well, shouldn't you go easier on seniors? And it's like, yeah, but only in the same way that you should go easier on a beginner. You should go to whatever is appropriate for your client. I've known seniors who I've given box jumps, 65 years old, and I've got them doing box jumps because they're in great shape and they can do it. And I've got 20-year-olds that can't. So as a rule, I hate that rule. You should just always be specific to your client. And then prescribing your intensity, generally, guys, you're going to use your heart rate. If you do have the ability to do VO2 max testing, awesome. Then you can have them work out. You'll still use the heart rates, but you'll know that it is tied specifically to their oxygen consumption. I really recommend it. If you guys ever get a chance to get a VO2 test, it is worth the money, especially if you're going to be a cardio athlete. Let's see here. Let me show you what that looks like. There we go. So a lot of times they'll give you a print that looks like this. Please be high res. Yes. So this person here is very much in their fat burning zone. When their heart rate is around 120, somewhere between 1 and 30, that's where they get into their aerobic threshold, where they are starting to produce a lot of lactic acid. Then there's their anaerobic threshold, where it's official. They are producing more lactic acid than they can process, which means, once they go above 150, eventually they will get tired and not be able to keep going because there will be a buildup. Do you know that buildup starts somewhere between 150 and 160 for this person? And it also shows you how many calories they burn per hour when their heart rate is whatever. So that's what's really cool about these. And then you can see what their general zones are. And you can just say, like, I want you to be between this heart rate and this heart rate. These numbers down here correspond with these numbers up here. And you can even see like how much oxygen it was they were actually consuming. So this person's in fairly good shape. They're not bad, not bad. They're consuming about 36 kilograms of oxygen per kilogram of body weight. I'm sorry, milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight. Between 36 and 42. It's good. That's pretty good. The higher you get, the better. Pro athletes are way up here, especially like soccer players and stuff. So if you ever get a chance to get a VO2 test, it's amazing. It's a really, really specific way. Generally, though, we'll often use that calculator that I pulled up earlier, and we will use a percentage of heart rate max. That is called your heart rate reserve method, and I will be teaching that to you guys in later classes. We'll do some math. And that is it. Look at that, 7:31 on the dot. That's actually pretty good. Any questions tonight, guys? How's everybody feeling? Questions about aerobic, anaerobic? Charlie, you feel good? I know it.
Yeah, I feel good. I'm good.
Love that. Kenny, how you feeling? How'd you like the evening?
Oh, I like it was pretty okay, yeah. Pretty good.
Not too bad. All right. Well, guys, that's all I got for you tonight. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. You might have noticed I didn't get the recording up today or the email out. That is going to go out as soon as I'm done getting this uploaded. So it's going to be a little slow. because I have to download it, edit it, and render the video and stuff, and then upload it to YouTube. But that being said, if you go on a Canvas now, you will see homework 3. So it's day 8. It's an even numbered day, therefore we have homework. So please go knock out homework 3 either today or tomorrow. You will find that it is covering today's lesson and yesterday's. Also, I already mentioned it once, but class announcement, we have school off on Monday. So, which I did not know when I initially did our day by day. So I think I told everybody that we're meeting in the park next Wednesday. That is now next Thursday. That's gonna push a day. Right, because today is 8, it's working again. 8, 9, 10, skip 11, 12. Sorry, no, I told you it was I told you it was Tuesday. We will be meeting on Wednesday the 20th. That's our next in-person meeting. So be prepared for that, but you know, have a good day on Monday, guys. Celebrate. All right, see you guys later.
Brad, I got a question.
Later.
Yeah, what's up? Question.
Will Canvas actually give you a midterm score, or you just whatever you got out of whatever and do the math?
Oh, a percentage. Does it not tell you percentages?
Not that I saw the last time when they sent me the email saying that it was graded. I just saw you got your number out of 15.
Weird. I didn't know that.
I'll look back again.
I'll bet you that's a setting thing. I'll bet you can find a setting that says, and you can change it from number to percentage.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah. But if you ever want, all you have to do, just divide the small number by the however many it was supposed to. Divide yours number by how many questions, which on tests is always 30, and on homework is always 15.
Okay.
The other way you can do it, and this is a little bit of the weird way to do it, but you can also, if it's a homework, and this is I only have this memorized because you know, I teach it, so it makes I don't have to do the math. Every point is 7% on homework, and every point is 3% on tests. So if you miss one,
Okay.
You got a 97. If you miss 2, you got a 93. So that's one way to do it.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. All right, man. I'll see you tomorrow.
All right, have a good one.